Okay, hello, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Lizzie King from the University of Georgia, and I'm pleased to talk to you today about work we've conducted with dual support from the Coastal Incentives Grant and a research grant from the Jekyll Island Authority. And our work focuses on plant community ecology and restoration planning, but in my presentation, I'm actually going to be focusing more on the process of collaborative research. But first, I'd like to thank all of our partners at UGA. Clint Moore and Nate Nimblink are co-investigators, and several students have contributed to this work. And today's talk will feature work from the two on top, Hannah Morris and Dessa Dunn. And many thanks to all of our coastal collaborators whose ideas have literally shaped our work, as you will see. So ecological restoration, like all natural resource management, entails planning. And our approach is to start with studying the ecological mechanisms by which plants respond to their environment and interact with each other and critters. And those mechanisms help us understand the emergent characteristics of the ecosystem, its composition, trajectories of change, and the various services that provide benefits to people. So restoration plans then emerge from evaluating those ecosystem traits and thinking about the changes that we'd like to see, and then identifying management tools that influence the mechanisms in the ecosystem in hopes that they will elicit some desired change in the composition or trajectory or emergent properties. So this approach requires two things. On the ecological side, we need knowledge of how ecosystems function and then change. And on the values side, we need to understand what are the desired states and trajectories and services that we're actually aiming for. And this usually requires research because of uncertainties, both in terms of what we understand about the ecosystems, but also what different values are at play. So the question is, what role do we play as academic scientists or researchers in partnerships when we're trying to navigate that uncertainty? And what processes can we employ with our partners to navigate those things successfully? So the way that we engage with partners really matters. And so I'd like to take a reflexive look, look in the mirror at how we treat different stakeholders' knowledge, their values, and how they come together and influence how we deal with uncertainty. And our context will be the Maritime live oak forests, where we've been working with a community of land stewards on different islands, along with our university team. And at the Center for Integrative Conservation Research at UGA, a plug for our program there, these are themes in the ICON PhD program. In conservation arenas, we challenge our students to take reflexive looks and specifically to consider their positionality or how their knowledge and values are positioned relative to others. And plurality, learning to embrace differences in order to gain new insights that any one point of view wouldn't yield. And then also processes. How do you actually do that in practice? And the coast gives us a relatively low stakes context in which to explore these things. No people or forests are in immediate danger of anything perilous from our research. There's also low tension. We're working with a very, very convivial group of folks. And this gives us time and space to reflect on our practice and hone our skills for dealing with the more contentious and urgent situations that are most certainly out there. So how and why do scientists contribute knowledge to restoration? We'll first consider knowledge and then values. Why might I, as a scientist, contribute knowledge? Well, one would be perhaps to apply standard restoration protocols to a situation, or to do research to fill a knowledge deficit. Or I could be co-producing knowledge, bringing my knowledge along with that held by partners to the table, Or for restoration, I could just use knowledge that partners already have and design a restoration plan around that. And these are all valid and useful in different contexts. But what I want to point out is that these do come with different assumptions about the relative value and legitimacy of partners' knowledge relative to scientists. And more specifically, down here at the far end of the spectrum, where I'm bringing in knowledge and applying a standard, knowledge that partners hold would be less valuable. I'm the one asserting that value. And at the far end of the spectrum, where we're co-producing knowledge or using partners' knowledge, their knowledge becomes relatively more valued and more legitimized through the type of engagement that we're in. And maybe these assumptions about the value and the legitimacy of different people's knowledge are shared and useful, but sometimes they're not shared. They're implicit assumptions, and they can affect the way we actually deal with uncertainty when it comes to what we don't know in a system. For example, if we do a little thought experiment, many of us have relied on fishers or residents, whoever, to give us some ecological information, and then we use that knowledge to guide management. But envision that we're working in a developing context where some mangroves have been cleared, and we know fish rely on them for breeding and for their little ones. So we ask local fishers, have you noticed any declines? And they say, no, in fact, there are more fishes these days. Are you still okay with using that knowledge, or do you mistrust it because it doesn't agree with your expectations? I mean, you may or may not trust it for various reasons, and that's fine. But the point is, the scientist here is in a position of authority. And as we seek to fill knowledge gaps, we decide, does their knowledge count? Another question is, do the fishers know whether we do or don't trust their knowledge? So as we move on the scale of valuing someone else's knowledge more, what that really means is we are abdicating some of the authority of science. And that may or may not be desirable depending on the context, but I would argue that it should be something we're aware of. It should be intentional and preferably transparent. So in restoration discourse, we talk a lot about building trust between collaborators, but we don't really talk that much about trusting each other's knowledges. So are there processes by which we can achieve this? So let's turn now to values. How do I contribute values that underlie restoration goals in a partnership? Again, I could bring standard protocols, and when I apply a standard protocol, it has specific restoration objectives embedded in it. And those are values. They're what I think should happen at a site. Or if we're co-producing goals with partners, then we're each bringing sets of objectives and visions, i.e. our values, to the table. Or I could be doing work where I'm adopting someone else's goals. They set the mandate and the objectives, and I find tools to deliver it. When this raises questions is when my values may be different from partners, or we have multiple partners whose values differ from one another. And now these scenarios are on a spectrum of either me exercising authority of my own values on one side, to the far end where we're actually embracing plurality. And embracing plurality means we can acknowledge multiple objectives and consider multiple priorities and look at trade-offs more transparently. But we still have to ask, who's getting heard in this process? Who ultimately makes decisions about what course of action will be taken? And again, are there processes that can help us navigate this? So in our research, of course, we tried to find those processes and use them. In the case of the Georgia Barrier Islands, we've been working in maritime live oak forests. And on the 4 islands that we've been working on, each island has its own history, its own managers, its own management mandates and objectives, and different concerns for the future. But one thing we found in common is a lot of mutual concern for whether live oak trees are regenerating. People are not seeing a lot of seedlings, and this was a concern amongst all the managers on these islands. And of course, they're very cooperative with one another. And we had these two dovetailing funded projects that we could explore what's going on the islands and what might be done about it. So the questions were posed: are the live oak forests in peril? And if so, what should we do? And when those questions come from managers, notice the implied positionality behind them. So on the knowledge side, this question requires ecological knowledge about forest dynamics. And there is shockingly little documented scientific research on the dynamics of maritime live oak forests. Go figure. I would have assumed that there was a lot more, but there really isn't. So we don't have much to bring to the table to actually answer this question as scientists. And on the objectives and values sides, what should be done really depends on each person's objectives. And managers have latent differences and some pretty overt ones that we are noticing. So how to then address these questions through research? Well, we turn the questions around and flip the positionality towards our partners and ask, well, what do you all know? You are the deepest sources of knowledge regarding the ecosystems that you're managing. And what are your visions? What are your goals exactly in being concerned for the fate of these forests? So two methods that are available to help navigate these. One is participatory action research, which is a way of building co-producing knowledge when your partners have complex knowledge mosaics influenced by science, by education, by experience on the island, and also the cultural lens through which they view all of that. Participatory action research is really good for synthesizing knowledge amongst diverse knowledge holders who each have unique mosaics. And on the objectives and values side, we have structured decision making, which is a tool for partners who have diverse visions for the future and different management objectives and different possible feasible actions to actually weigh out the degree to which those different actions will achieve multiple objectives. So both of these methods are rooted in bringing together different perspectives through dialogue and co-producing knowledge and objectives for restoration and other management situations. So just in brief, participatory action research is about co-producing knowledge from diverse experiential perspectives. And those knowledges are brought together. People then share and question and reflect and learn from one another, which then adds new insights into the knowledge they already held. Outside data can be brought in to also question and reflect. And the goal is to identify actions, initiate change, monitor what happens, and rinse and repeat. Structured decision making is also a cyclical process of learning, but about navigating multiple objectives. A common problem is defined, but multiple objectives to solving it are identified. Feasible alternative courses of action are identified. And then you use some sort of formal modeling to evaluate the consequences of different alternatives for achieving objectives, with knowledge getting input from the knowledge side at various points. Then you weigh some trade-offs, you decide what to do, put it into action, and learn in an adaptive cycle. So how we started doing this in our project with the PAR was started with walking interviews with coastal stewards, getting a feel for their concerns and their outlooks, and then bringing everyone together with additional stakeholders for a workshop. And at that workshop, the participants synthesized their knowledge to identify key factors that limit live oak regeneration, and came up with a list of highly concordant views on what's actually limiting these things. We also initiated research with seedling performance experiments replicated on 4 islands, 128 deer fences, over 3,000 seedlings planted, looking at some of the conditions that were identified in the workshops. And this was led by Hannah Morris. And if she looks tired, it's because she is. That's the last batch of the 3,000 seedlings going out to get planted. The workshop also used PAR to highlight what we don't know. Participants identified 25 key knowledge gaps, and we're working on the first 2, but there's lots more to go, many more PAR cycles spinning in the future. And there's a report from this workshop if anyone's interested. So on to structured decision making. We identified the problem and objectives again in that first workshop that we held with all the stakeholders. And for each island, the key objectives for forest composition were different. Ossabaw and St. Catharines were looking much more at passive management, allowing the forests to evolve, whereas Sapelo and Jekyll were much more interested in active restoration to restore or preserve the composition. So to facilitate the active restoration partners, we held a second workshop, and we really got into much more of the specifics about different objectives and feasible restoration methods as alternatives. The objectives that we came up with were getting planted seedlings to 2 meters tall and with maximum survival and minimum cost. And we looked at 3 practical alternatives for treatments in the field around those planted seedlings. Then from the alternatives to the consequences, the modeling, this is where we need a knowledge input. And we don't yet know how all of these things work. We have some experimental data, but when in doubt, ask the experts. So we did interviews with nurserymen and restoration professionals with experience with planting live oaks, and asked them to estimate under these different scenarios, what would you expect young seedlings to do? And their responses were highly concordant with one another. So we're using those as parameters in a demographic model and also utility functions to then be able to project under different types of alternatives what the costs and survival probabilities of seedlings would be, and to what degree those satisfy different managers' objectives. So this work is being done by Dessa Dunn, working closely with Clint Moore to develop this as a decision support tool for someone who's navigating these uncertainties with regards to how to do active restoration with live oaks. So from using PAR and SDM, what have we learned? So what do we now know about MLO forests? Well, one, we don't yet know whether these forests are really imperiled, but planting seedlings is a good bet hedging strategy. If there are no seedlings in the understory, you can't have big trees. So it makes sense if you're really concerned about having trees replacing like canopy gaps, planting some. The big questions are still the contingencies around the effects of fire and succession, these broader picture ecosystem changes that we really just don't have a grip on yet. So some big questions remain and plenty of scope for more integrated research. And from SDM, well, one takeaway is that active restoration isn't everyone's goal, but we are generating a practical decision support tool for those who are interested in it. And now we're tailoring the model and looking forward to linking it to action and planting some trees. So what have we learned about collaboration for restoration? Well, being aware and intentional and having robust methodologies has allowed us to look reflexively at how to embrace other people's knowledge and values, and also to trust them. And we've gained a lot of social learning by attending to these themes of positionality and plurality and process. And building these skills is important because when it comes to promoting healthy coastal ecosystems or any ecosystems, we need to bear in mind that people will have different understandings and perspectives on what a healthy ecosystem is. And the way that we engage with people in collaborative research is going to shape what we ultimately learn and what goals are pursued. So our next goal is to take these practices to embrace broader diversity of knowledge and values, specifically with coastal residents, particularly African-American communities. So we've initiated a listening project to archive and empower their experiences, knowledges, and values, because coastal ecosystems can only be healthy when they are justly healthy. So we aim to empower these voices, which still go largely unheard in natural resource management, and that needs to change. So with that, I thank you for your extra 5 minutes. And here's a few references on the methods we adopted, and we'll be happy to talk more about it in the panel session, or you can always email us. Thanks very much.